The first line of that letter, it just made my stomach drop in a way I hadn't really ever felt before. Not fear, not even anger, just this profound sense of something being fundamentally wrong. I'm pregnant. My brain just stopped. It wasn't a text, you know? Not an email. An actual, physical letter, stamped and everything, like we were living in some movie from the 80s. I was standing there in my apartment in Denver, still holding my keys, probably looking utterly bewildered. Then I read the second line. It's yours, and we need to talk about co-parenting. And that's when my mind started screaming. Because this wasn't just a shock, this was utterly, completely, hilariously impossible. Like, 0.0% chance. And for a good 30 seconds, I just stood there, reading it twice, then 3 times, my brain trying to process something that simply could not exist. See, my ex, Chloe, and I had broken up maybe 6 weeks earlier. It wasn't dramatic. I just told her, gently, that I didn't see a future for us. She cried, asked if there was someone else. When I said no, she seemed almost offended, like the idea of us just being incompatible was a personal insult. I helped her pack, drove her to her new apartment across town in Boulder. And that was it. A clean, quiet break. I honestly thought she was moving on. But that letter changed everything. Because there's this one microscopic detail about me that makes the whole "I'm pregnant, it's yours" thing utterly impossible. I'm sterile. Completely. Permanently. And I have been since I was a kid. Since I was 11, actually. I had leukemia then. The kind that needed really aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. The kind where the doctors had to sit my parents down and explain, very carefully, that saving my life meant sacrificing certain futures. I survived, obviously. I'm here, telling you this. But the treatment left me with something called azoospermia. It's a fancy medical term, basically meaning zero reproductive capability. Nada. None. I've had multiple tests over the years, 3 different doctors, 3 different labs, and every single result came back the same. Nothing. Not even a trace. Not even a chance. So, when I read that letter, when Chloe claimed I got her pregnant, my first thought wasn't panic. Or fear. Or even anger. It was genuine curiosity. Like, what exactly did she think was going to happen next? We'd dated for 2 years. And looking back now, it's so clear. All the little red flags I'd ignored, because I genuinely wanted it to work. Small comments about my friends, how I spent my time. Then bigger things, questioning my work decisions, my money. If anything went wrong in her life, it was always someone else's fault. And she had this incredible knack for twisting conversations until I was apologizing for things I didn't even do. I should have seen it. But love, or whatever I felt, can be pretty blinding. For 6 weeks after the breakup, it was silence. No calls. No texts. Nothing. I figured she was processing, maybe dating someone new. I genuinely hoped she'd find someone better suited. Then that letter showed up. And suddenly, the silence didn't feel like acceptance anymore. It felt like planning. What made it even weirder? Chloe knew about my cancer. I told her early on, because it felt like a significant part of my story. I even showed her the small scar on my chest from the port they used for chemo. I talked about the hospital stays, about my parents basically living in Children's Hospital Colorado for months. But the sterility? I never explicitly told her that. It just never came up. We never had those deep talks about having kids someday. We never got to that stage where you map out your whole future together. I always figured if we ever did get serious, I'd explain then. So, she knew about the aggressive treatment. But either she didn't connect the dots about what that meant for fertility, or she knew exactly what it meant and decided to gamble that I wouldn't have proof. I couldn't figure out if that made her desperate or just incredibly calculating. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to think this through. Part of me, the tiny, ridiculous part, wondered if maybe there was some medical miracle I didn't know about. Some 1 in a billion chance the doctors missed something. So, I pulled out my most recent test results, from 2 years ago, the ones my oncologist ordered during a routine checkup. And there it was, black and white, azoospermia, 0 count. Recommendation for assisted reproduction if desired. I sat at my kitchen table in Denver, the medical report and her letter side by side. The whole situation felt surreal, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life by mistake. Finally, I wrote back. Simple. Direct. I'll need a paternity test. I didn't accuse her. I didn't get emotional. Just a reasonable request, given the circumstances. Her response came fast. Way faster than the first letter. This time, an email. 3 paragraphs of pure outrage. How could I question her? She'd never lied. I was trying to abandon my responsibilities. The phrase that really stuck with me? How dare you doubt me? As if my request for scientific verification was a personal insult. As if wanting proof for something biologically impossible was unreasonable. I read her email twice. Then I made a decision. I called my oncologist's office and requested my complete medical history. Everything. From my original diagnosis at 11 through every follow-up appointment and test. It took about a week to compile, but when it arrived, it was beautiful in its completeness. Treatment records, medication logs, 3 separate analysis reports spanning 15 years, all saying the same thing. I scanned every relevant page, put together a PDF with a cover letter explaining the situation very factually, and sent it to her email with a simple message: I am biologically incapable of fathering any child. Any further claims otherwise are medically impossible and legally actionable. I hit send at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. Then I poured myself a drink and waited. I expected an apology. Or an angry denial. Or just silence while she figured out her next move. What I got was nothing. Radio silence. No reply, no phone call. 3 days went by. I actually started to think maybe she'd realized her mistake and quietly backed down. That this nightmare was just going to fade away. Then, Monday morning, another letter. Not from her. This one was from a law firm in Colorado Springs. Professionally printed, serious letterhead. It informed me their client was pursuing legal action regarding child support and parental obligations. They wanted to schedule a meeting. Referenced her pregnancy as established fact. Mentioned amounts I'd be expected to contribute. And made it very clear my refusal to cooperate was being documented. I read it standing in my living room. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt actual anger. Not at the absurdity, but at the deliberate escalation. She wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. And she'd brought lawyers into something that could have been resolved with one honest conversation. I called my attorney, David, that same day. A guy I'd used for some contract work a few years back. I laid out the entire situation for him. His first question was about documentation. When I said yes, complete medical records, he actually chuckled. Said it was the easiest case he'd ever seen. But then he added something that made me pause. The question isn't whether you'll win, he said. It's what her endgame is. What she actually thinks will happen when the truth comes out. That lawyer's letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted to make absolutely sure I handled this perfectly. David told me to gather everything. Emails, texts, medical records, anything that could establish a timeline. And while I was digging through old messages, I started noticing things I'd missed before. About 4 months before our breakup, her texting patterns had completely changed. She'd go hours without responding, when she used to reply within minutes. And there were entire evenings where she claimed to be working late, but her social media showed she was out somewhere else. Looking back now, with fresh eyes, I saw other signs too. She'd seemed tired more often those last few months. Made excuses about feeling sick that I'd chalked up to stress. Even started wearing looser clothes that I'd barely registered at the time. Then, I'd attributed everything to us growing apart. Now, those gaps felt different. They felt like something I should have paid more attention to. I took screenshots of everything. Organized them by date. Sent the whole package to David, asking what our next move should be. He called me back within an hour. He said we were going to send her lawyers something they definitely weren't expecting. Complete medical documentation proving biological impossibility. Treatment records going back 20 years. 3 separate lab reports, all saying the same thing. The response we sent was clinical. And devastating. No emotion. No accusations. Just pure medical fact, laid out in language even a first-year law student couldn't misinterpret. We included a letter from my oncologist explaining the treatment, the permanent effects on fertility, and a statement confirming that natural conception was impossible in my case. David added a paragraph I particularly appreciated: any further attempts to pursue paternity claims would be considered fraudulent and could result in legal consequences for filing false documents. We sent it certified mail to her lawyers, regular mail to her apartment, and copied her on the email version. Just to make sure nobody could claim they didn't receive it. Then I waited. Expecting a quick retraction. An embarrassed phone call. Maybe just silence while they figured out how to back down gracefully. What I got instead was something I genuinely didn't see coming. Absolute radio silence. The kind of silence that feels louder than any argument. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. No response from her attorneys. No angry messages from her. Not even a passive-aggressive social media post I could screenshot. David said this was actually a good sign, that they were probably trying to figure out how to withdraw without admitting wrongdoing. But something about it felt off. People like Chloe didn't just slink away quietly when their plans collapsed. They adapted. They found new angles. They burned everything down rather than admit defeat. I kept checking my email obsessively. Kept looking at my phone, expecting some new crisis. The waiting was honestly worse than the initial confrontation. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Can we talk about what she's done to you?" The message was from Olivia, Chloe's younger sister. I'd met her maybe 5 times. Always seemed nice, but distant. I debated whether to respond at all, whether this was some kind of trap. But curiosity won out. I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day at a small shop in Fort Collins. She showed up looking exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Before I could even say hello, she started apologizing for her sister's behavior. Apparently, the whole family had been in crisis mode ever since my medical records arrived. Her parents, who lived in Golden, had already started buying baby furniture and telling their friends about becoming grandparents. Now, everyone was trying to process the fact that their daughter had lied about something this massive. I asked if Chloe had told them who the actual father was, keeping my voice neutral. Olivia just shook her head. Nobody could get a straight answer. But then she added something interesting. About 8 months ago, right around when those texting gaps and behavioral changes started, Chloe had gotten weirdly close with someone from her office downtown, a guy she'd mentioned a few times as just a work friend. Olivia had met him once, at some company happy hour. Remembered thinking it was strange how much time they spent talking in the corner. But she'd figured it was innocent because the guy, Mark, was married with kids. The way she emphasized that he had been married made my stomach sink. I could already see where this was going. I could already predict the explosion that was coming for people who had nothing to do with me. I thanked Olivia for the information, told her I appreciated her honesty, and went home to document everything. That same evening, Chloe tried a different approach. She started calling Mr. Henderson, my landlord, leaving messages about how I was an unfit tenant who harassed pregnant women, trying to get me evicted. Mr. Henderson, bless him, called me immediately to ask what kind of drama I'd gotten into. When I explained the situation and offered to show him the legal correspondence, he just laughed. Said he'd dealt with vengeful exes before. He mentioned she called 3 times that day and asked me to send him something in writing so he could tell her to stop. I emailed him a brief summary and copies of the relevant documents. He forwarded them to his attorney with a note saying if she contacted him again, they'd pursue harassment charges. But she wasn't done. Not even close. While she was trying to destroy my housing situation, she was also running a completely different scheme at her corporate office in Aurora. Jessica, a friend of mine who worked in the same industry, sent me a screenshot of a fundraiser that had been circulating through her company's internal channels. The description was heartbreaking. If you didn't know the truth, single mother abandoned by her partner, struggling to afford prenatal care, just trying to give her baby a good start in life. People had donated. Not huge amounts, but enough that it probably added up to a few thousand. The comments were full of supportive messages, calling me every name you could imagine. Jessica said the company's HR department had gotten involved once someone questioned why she was soliciting money at work. But by then, the damage was done. The narrative was set. And I was the villain in a story I didn't even know was being told. I felt this weird mix of anger and exhaustion. Like every time I thought we'd reached the bottom, she found a new way to dig deeper. David said we could pursue defamation claims. But he also pointed out that sometimes the best response is just letting someone destroy their own credibility. And in this case, that's exactly what was happening. The real breaking point came from a direction nobody expected. Mark's wife, Sarah, started asking questions. Apparently, Chloe had been sending him increasingly frantic messages, begging him to step up and help with the baby, threatening to tell his wife everything if he didn't. She'd made the crucial mistake of sending one of those messages while his phone was sitting on the kitchen counter. And Sarah was standing right there. Sarah confronted him. He apparently crumbled immediately and confessed to an 8-month affair. Their entire marriage imploded in the span of a single evening. But here's where it gets messy. Sarah wasn't content to just divorce him quietly. She wanted everyone to know exactly why their family was falling apart. And she had screenshots of every message Chloe had sent. She posted them in a private Facebook group for parents at a local elementary school in Castle Rock. Someone from that group worked at Chloe's company. Within 48 hours, the entire office knew the real story. The fundraiser got shut down. HR launched an investigation into whether company resources had been misused. And suddenly, Chloe went from sympathetic victim to office pariah in record time. David called me on a Friday afternoon with news that felt almost anticlimactic after everything else. Her lawyers had sent a formal letter withdrawing all claims, stating that the initial petition had been filed in error. No apology. No acknowledgement of the chaos they'd caused. Just a sterile legal statement, basically saying they'd made a mistake. He asked if I wanted to push for anything else. A formal retraction, maybe. Or a settlement to cover my legal fees. But honestly, I just wanted it over. Let it go, I told him. Let her deal with the consequences she created. He agreed, but suggested I keep all the documentation indefinitely, just in case she tried something else down the road. I organized everything into a folder on my computer, backed it up in 3 different places, and tried to figure out how to move forward from something this bizarre. But the story wasn't quite finished yet. Because 2 weeks later, I got one more message that showed me exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. It came through LinkedIn, of all places. And it was from Sarah, Mark's now ex-wife. She apologized for reaching out, but said she thought I deserved to know what had actually happened. And what she told me filled in all the gaps. She'd gone through every message on her husband's phone after his confession. Thousands of texts, spanning months. The picture they painted was ugly. Chloe had pursued him aggressively from the start, knew he was married from day one, and had apparently told him I was emotionally abusive and controlling, to justify the whole thing. They'd been meeting during those convenient late work nights and weekend office emergencies that I'd been too trusting to question. Mark had apparently been stringing her along the whole time, making promises he never intended to keep. When Chloe got pregnant, he panicked and tried to end things. That's when the threats started. That's when she told him she'd destroy his marriage if he didn't step up. And that's apparently also when she decided I might be a more convenient option for child support than a messy custody battle with a married man who wanted nothing to do with her. Sarah didn't send me all the screenshots, just described what she'd found. But it was enough to understand the timeline. In messages from about a month before our breakup, Chloe had told Mark she was going to end things with me soon, but needed to time it right so I wouldn't get suspicious. And in others, sent 2 weeks after our breakup, she told him she was free now and they could finally be together openly. His response was basically that he'd never promised her anything serious. The pregnancy announcement to him came about a month later. His reaction was pure panic, accusing her of trying to trap him, saying he'd never leave his wife and kids. That's when she apparently pivoted to Plan B, pinning the whole thing on me. Banking on the fact that I'd been her boyfriend recently enough that it could seem plausible. What she hadn't counted on was me having ironclad medical proof that made her entire story impossible. And she definitely hadn't expected her backup plan to collapse so spectacularly when Mark's wife found those messages. The fallout at her workplace became impossible to contain once HR started their investigation. The fundraiser she'd organized violated company policy about using internal systems for personal gain. Several employees had complained about the situation once the truth came out. Her company didn't fire her outright, probably worried about wrongful termination claims since she was pregnant. But they transferred her to a rent department with no client contact. Made it clear her career advancement there was finished. Mark got fired immediately, though. Something about his affair violating the company's ethics policy, since they'd been meeting up during work hours and using company resources. His divorce moved forward fast. Sarah had hired an aggressive attorney. Those screenshots made any custody negotiation pretty one-sided. From what I heard, he ended up in a studio apartment, paying most of his salary in child support and alimony. I felt bad for his kids. Honestly, they were innocent victims in all of this. But I couldn't muster much sympathy for him or Chloe at that point. About a month after the legal case was withdrawn, Chloe made one final attempt at damage control. She sent me an email. Not through lawyers this time, just a direct message that was somehow both apologetic and demanding. She acknowledged that maybe she'd made some mistakes in how she handled things. Said the stress of the pregnancy had made her act irrationally. Then she got to her real point: she needed financial help. The number was so specific it was almost funny, like she'd calculated exactly what she thought she could squeeze out of me, $15,000 as a one-time payment. She claimed it would cover her medical expenses and help her get settled before the baby came. And she promised that if I gave it to her, she'd sign anything I wanted, confirming I had no legal obligation to the child. The email ended with what I guess she thought was a compelling argument. That helping her was the right thing to do, given our history. That she was scared and alone, and this was my chance to be the bigger person. I forwarded the email to David without responding to her. His reply was brief and perfect. He sent her a formal letter stating that I would not be providing any financial support. That any further contact would be considered harassment. And that we retained all documentation of her fraudulent paternity claims should she attempt any future legal action. He didn't threaten her exactly, but the implication was clear. She'd already destroyed her own credibility. Any attempt to come after me again would just make things worse for her. After that letter, the silence was finally permanent. No more emails. No more letters. No attempts to contact me through mutual friends or family. I changed my phone number anyway. Blocked her on every social media platform I could think of. And made it clear to the few people we both knew that I didn't want updates about her life or situation. About 7 months later, Sarah, Mark's ex-wife, sent me one final, brief message. Chloe had given birth to a boy. She was living with her parents because she couldn't afford her own place anymore. And Mark had signed away his parental rights rather than deal with custody arrangements, though he was still legally obligated for child support. Apparently, he'd wanted nothing to do with the situation, and his divorce settlement actually included a clause preventing contact with Chloe to avoid further drama. The whole thing was messy and sad. A baby growing up in the wreckage of all these burned relationships. But it wasn't my mess. And it wasn't my responsibility. I thanked Sarah for the update. Wished her well with her own recovery and moving forward. And closed that chapter of my life completely. Looking back now, the weirdest part isn't even the audacity of trying to pin a pregnancy on someone who's sterile. It's how close she came to making it work, through pure manipulation and social pressure. If I hadn't had those medical records. If I hadn't kept every email and text. If I'd been the kind of person who just accepted responsibility without asking questions, I could have ended up legally obligated to a child that wasn't mine for the next 18 years. The cancer that took away my ability to have biological children ended up being the only thing that saved me from a lifetime of paying for someone else's choices. I don't talk about this story much in real life. It's not exactly casual conversation. But when I do tell people, the main thing I emphasize is this: document everything. Trust, but verify. And never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting yourself with facts. Chloe made her choices. Burned every bridge she had. And created a situation where her kid would grow up knowing his mother tried to commit fraud. Those are consequences she'll live with forever, not me. The lesson here is simple. When someone pressures you to skip verification and just trust them, that's exactly when you need documentation most. My medical condition was unique. But the principle is universal. Protect yourself with evidence. Maintain boundaries, even when called unreasonable. Honest people don't rage when asked for proof. Did I handle that final request for money the right way, just shutting it down completely, or should I have pushed for a formal settlement given all she put me through?